world that we live in is currently set up for convenience, and convenience is a killer of many things, but with convenience comes really poor lifestyle decisions. And the one that I'm going to speak about today specifically is a lack of movement and postures that we fall into as a result of the lifestyle conditions that we're set up for. Now, if we have a look at our day-to-day, a lot of people are stuck sitting down all day, doing mundane jobs in positions over and over and over again. And the gold star of all of this is apparently 30 minutes of activity and exercise daily, with no guidelines on mobility, strength training. It's just really about aerobic fitness, which isn't a bad thing, but it's a very small component of what we need to be doing. When we look at sedentary postures, we form adaptations as a product of, or as a design of being in a position for a period of time. And those, especially for someone that is living a very active lifestyle, can become quite detrimental. So today, what I want to talk about specifically is little hacks and little ways to look at improving how you show up for training and show up for, your day to day. And I'm gonna link it into training and exercise because that's what we do here. But the reality is this applies to everyone. And when we like, if we just take a step back and have a look from an evolution standpoint, we are not designed to sit down all day. Like our hips aren't, our glutes specifically aren't meant to just be sat on all day. We're not meant to be stuck in these chronic postures, because the result of that means that we're going to get some areas of the body that sort of are down regulated, and we're going to have other areas which are chronically shortened all the time. And the issue with that is anytime we get exposure outside of those chronically shortened positions, we're actually quite fragile. We're quite weak because we've only been exposed to those shortened positions. So part of the way that we look at this, we need to have a look at the positions and the postures that we're in on a daily. And we need to look at how we can offset that so that we can optimize movement to start off with. But then we need to look at how we can optimize movement for training, because that's a real issue. Because, the stronger and stronger you get, or the further you get into your training journey, you need to actually offset these sedentary postures even more. And I'll break out why in a moment, but it becomes quite important. And I don't think a lot of people place a huge amount of, weight on these decisions, but people do talk about posture and, how you hold yourself. But, I think it's really important to understand that the body will create adaptations of everything that you do. If you do 1,000 calf raises a day, your calves are going to get jacked. If you sit down for a period of time in a really flexed over position, you're going to adapt to that position just because you're in that position all day. Like, the body's a smart thing and it will adapt to the stimulus that you provide. So let's have a look at the hips and the lower back to start off. Let's relate this to training. And, this is a conversation that I have with a lot of people. We are designed, like our glutes, right, on the backside of our hips, in terms of cross-sectional area, the muscle fibers, they are the biggest muscle that we have. And we sit on them, some 6, 8, 12 hours a day if we're stuck at a sedentary job. That is a real issue, because those tissues, instead of contracting and sliding on one another, become quite matted down. They become quite locked into certain positions and inactive. They want to be working for us. They want to be supporting. Now, the issue with that is, if we look at the human body, when you have an area of the body that isn't functioning all that well, another area of the body will upregulate or do a little bit more work to try and control that movement. So if we look at sitting, for instance, the hip flexors, I'm sure you've all heard of them. The hip flexors become quite tight and, hypertonic is the word. They become quite tight and active, but it doesn't mean that they're strong. It just means that they're on and tight and constantly in a state where they're contracting. That's really problematic. If you think of running, if you think of someone that's doing a deadlift, these are all postures where we need to extend and straighten out that hip. So if you've been sitting down for 8 hours and then you've got a heavy deadlift session coming up, or even just a voluminous deadlift session coming up, you're expecting that your glutes are just going to come to the party, and you're expecting that you have the range of movement of the hip to function and do that really well. But that, in reality, over time, that's not going to happen all that effectively. So we need to start to look at this of, okay, well, let's reverse engineer the positions that we're in, reverse engineer where we want to be in space, and then attack. So if you have a look, say I sat down for 8 hours a day and I was sitting down in a desk job and my hips are really bundled up. As part of my movement plan and my movement strategy, getting into a deadlift position, for instance, would be some trigger point, some soft tissue work through the front of the hip. Now, that's not going to fix everything. All that's doing is providing a window. It's giving me a window where I get a little bit of extra length in my hips, which gives me an opportunity to then upregulate some other areas, right? So I would start off with some mobility-based work, get my hips moving, get that extension range. But now, because I've been sitting on my glutes just don't just turn on all of a sudden, right? Like I've made them, they're like very dormant. They're just sitting there. So they become quite lazy. So now what I would want to do is get some tissue some movement flowing through my tissues. I would want to do some stuff that stress out my glute. Now, if I was looking at my glute, I would want to contract it in a shortened position. So like a hip bridge or a hip thrust or something similar. But then I would also want to stress it through a larger range of movement where it's the stimulus of length under load is there. So that would be a very good starting point. But then I would also want to expose my hips to some positions of length under load. I would actually want to expose my hips to that because you can see here. So say for instance, my hips are locked into flexion. So that means I can't straighten out my hips. If I was deadlifting in that top position, I need to straighten out my hips. But if I'm not straightening them out, I'm then just going to figure out the rest of the movement and I'll end up just bending through my back, or I'll be compensating somewhere along the line. Now, you will have a grace period with all of this. And depending on how hard you train, it might not be an issue. But there will be a point in time for most people where the mobility restrictions that they get through the postures that they do over and over again, aka sedentary lifestyle, will become a problem for you in training and in life. And I think we need to look at that and go, okay, like doing 3 minutes of trigger point isn't enough to offset 8 hours of sitting on my glute all day. It's just not enough. We need to be like, dedicated. It doesn't mean you need to spend 3 hours, but you need to warm up the tissue. You need to lengthen the overly short tissue and you need to integrate that in. Now, obviously in, a bigger picture, when we look at it specifically at the hips, we would want to get up and get moving, get walking, because our hips are meant to design in opposing movements. We're meant to rotate front when one's going forward, one's going backwards. It's called reciprocating movement. That's what we're designed to do. We're not necessarily designed to be stable like this, where we just move front and back. So, even throughout the day, there's a popularity of having standing desks at work, but getting up and getting moving, going for a walk is such a powerful thing, more so just because of the reciprocating movement at the hips, right? It gets the pelvis going. When your legs going back behind you, extending out all of that shortened tissue, and you can just see that sort of plays into things a lot better. And funnily enough, it actually helps with digestion as well, because you've got your intestines that are above your hips, and all that movement actually helps you digest food as well. So there's a lot of flow-on effects of that. Like, nothing in our body is there by chance. Our body is designed in a way to function in a really, really strong position. But the reality is our postures of our day-to-day actually aren't conducive to strong positions. But that's a side note. So if we look at the lower body, really what we need to do is make sure that we upregulate the downregulated parts. We need to get some length through the areas, but that doesn't mean the shortened areas. That doesn't mean that those tissues are actually strong. Once you lengthen them, you need to strengthen them in lengthened positions, and then you integrate into training. Now, if we have a look, right? So let's move into the upper body. Let's look at bench press. Let's look at, the positions that you need to get into for bench press. So if we start off there, we need to have a really high chest, extended, our shoulder blades pulling back and down. And that puts us in a very stable position in our upper body, where it prevents a lot of injury at the shoulder because we're just aligned really well. It means that when we're actually doing the bench press itself, we're putting our shoulder in a very optimal position to, withstand forces, basically. And when that's done well, it's a really big injury prevention tool, because being in the right position means that you're going to not have a waste of energy doing something. It means that you're not going to be compensating overly, and that you should be able to hold that position, and there shouldn't be any big changes through the movements that you're doing. Now, if we reverse engineer that and we have a look at how we sit rounded, a flex back. We've got our shoulder blades normally lift up and roll forward. That is literally the opposite of what we need for like a bench press movement. So say, for instance, I've just sat down for 8 hours and I've been sitting, I'm stressed, I'm jacked up, I'm in my shoulders, you know, my upper traps, it's a common complaint, are just super tight and on. I'm going to be stuck in these postures that are just not that conducive to training. So as part of what we would want to do, we would want to make sure that we have really good shoulder blade or scapular control, that our ribs are moving, rotating, flexing forward, extending backwards, and then we have the ability for our arm to move up overhead. That is so important. But because of the postures that we're stuck in every single day, we almost like create our own blocks to get in a good position. So from an upper body, I would say, you know, I've got some key areas that I would focus on. And the first one is the ability to actually just get your arm up overhead, full range, if possible. Because when you do that, you get all that really nice lengthening through like your big muscles, such as your lats. It also means that you can externally rotate your shoulder, which is really important for like a lot of gym-based training, even like a pull-up, for instance. As you flex overhead and bring your arm overhead, you're getting that really nice external rotation as well, right? So it's a really nice combined movement. It's a big tick. It's something that we need to maintain. The second is rib cage movement. Our upper, like our thoracic, our rib cage is designed to rotate. Now, yes, it has a little bit of flex forward and extension backwards, but the reality is with it, it's only a small amount at each segment. And if you rotate, by default, you will get that extension and flexion anyway. So start off by getting a really good amount of rotation through the ribs. Like even just a side lying thoracic rotation drill is enough to get things moving. Now, if you have the overhead movement and you've got your ribs moving, then the magic here is getting your shoulder blades to work and move effectively, because you know, the postures that we sit in daily puts them in a really poor position, but the shoulder blade is a linchpin for the shoulder. If it's not doing what it needs to do, if it's not strong, if you can't contract the muscles, it just means that you're in a really compensated and poor position from word go. So isolated retraction, isolated protraction. So that's squeezing your shoulder blades back, pushing them forward, elevating them, depressing them, and then getting them to do combined movements like an overhead press is so powerful just to unglue some of the postures that we're stuck in day to day in these sedentary positions. So, you know, I think if we sort of, you know, take a big step back and we look at it, we go, okay, there is probably no way from escaping these postures. There's no way from escaping, you know, what we need to do to make money for a living, for work, and everything in between, right? So we need to go, okay, well, let's go on the front foot of things and go, well, how do we combat that? And a lot of the cases, it's maintaining baseline movement of how you're designed to function. We're not saying perfect. I'm saying baseline movement. You know, if we just look at the spine, the ribs, the thoracic specifically, your ribs rotate, your lower back, you can flex, you can extend, your hips can rotate, you can lift your arm up overhead and get shoulder blade movement. If we have a baseline of movement that is like the gold standard, and we know what that is for each individual, and then the postures that you're in chronically, you have to do something to offset those positions, whether it's stretching, whether it's dynamic mobility. You need to do something to get you out of those positions. Then, not big exercises. We need to do some small exercises which give our brain feedback to switch on or upregulate muscle groups or muscle patterns, so that when we go to do our bigger exercises, we are more of like a unit. We move as one. That is really important. So I think, you know, reverse engineering it is a really, really important way of looking at training, and it's looking at it from a lens of just baseline movement, but also from injury prevention. It's huge. And, you know, I don't think there's enough weight placed on that, because you know, people say, I'm very fit, I'm very active. but I'm also like, yeah, okay, you might train 4, 5, 6 hours a week, but you sit down 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. It's probably not enough to say I spent 5 minutes doing movement today. It's probably just not enough. So, you know, I would personally try and get into the habit of doing something every single day that's not training related, like movement, mobility, just non-specific movement that's restoring baseline movements, walking, stretching, mobility. And then when it comes to training, having a very specific warm-up plan for the exercises you're doing, because the last thing you want to do is go in to execute a lift such as a deadlift and you've got no glute function, because then you're just relying on your lower back and your hamstrings to do the movement and you're not actually using the big driver, AKA your glutes. So, you know, I think the ugly side of all of this is that most people wait till they've had an injury or they're in pain to implement something like this. And sometimes it's quite hard to, you know, unravel that. It's not sexy being ahead of it, but if you can get into, you know, a zone where you're thinking and listening to your body, it is seriously the best tool that you can have to offset some of these sedentary postures. Now, that's it for me today. I'll see you guys in the next episode.